10 days. The story for 294. 10 days to stir up what seemed like entire divisions. 10 days to watch seemingly legends turn to mortals. Short notice fights have always had some of the most monumental moments for the sport, both good and bad on both ends of the deal, but this last 294 card showed the worst for the early acceptors. Before we dive too deep into it, I want to point out that this card had more fouls than any other card I've ever watched, and zero repercussions. Not a single point taken. Fight-ending crotch shots.
Was it my balls?
No, it wasn't your ball. You didn't take your ball.
Oh no, come on, man. All dick and balls.
Hair pulling, and illegal knees. Some of these fights had multiple warnings in the same round with still no point deduction, which seems crazy. The doctor stoppage of the Johnny Walker fight felt sloppy too. He had a whole 5 minutes to recover from the illegal strike. Instead, the doctor asked him a question in his second language, not even a minute into the timeout, that he did answer, and didn't even give him a second chance. Knowing Johnny Walker, he probably genuinely didn't even know where he was before the fight. He just knew he was fighting.
Still has his gloves on. Didn't get a chance to get changed.
They kicked me back to go like you win the fight, come back, motherfucker. I didn't take my gloves off.
I'll keep it short and simple. Anyone can lose. And if you fight long enough, you will lose. We've seen this many times over the last few years, but a few things I think were special about this card. 1, finding out how a championship style doesn't always work in a 3-round fight, and 2, the evolution of a pure grappler to a well-rounded fighter. We'll start with Kamaru Usman versus Khamzat Chimaev. The original fight, being Paulo Costa with Usman taking his spot, was interesting based on how well of a challenge it presented Costa being on the feet. And throwing his crazy physicality in, it was hard to imagine that he would have been held down and ragdolled like most of Chimaev's opponents have been. It's all love, Kevin Holland. It was cheap. I thought this replacement was probably best case scenario, really. Usman had been dominating the welterweight division for years using his dominant wrestling-based style, while slowly getting more proficient at striking to finally knock out a once notable striker, Jorge Masvidal. Kamaru clearly always cut a good amount of weight, so him moving up in weight classes, especially on short notice, didn't seem like a huge issue to me. The question of cardio wasn't much of a concern to me either. He's very used to 5-round fights and definitely doesn't seem like the type of guy to get out of shape while not in camp. So seemingly, this fight only stood to show how good Khamzat really is. And don't take any of this to think I'm a huge Usman fan. I could delve deep into why I think otherwise. Ultimately, I think his acquaintance with 5 rounds was his downfall in this fight. Usman, or as some call him, the Nigerian NyQuil, has put on plenty of snooze fest that I haven't been a big fan of. He has developed an impeccable style that more or less stalls out his opponents until they're too tired to do anything about it, and he gets a finish or the fight's over. His grappling work, albeit boring as hell, is impressive. It accomplishes the goal it's intended to masterfully most of the time: avoid damage and score points. It's not flashy, and it's not entertaining, but it's effective. Shoot for a takedown. Land it? Great. Don't land it, take it to the cage and work to get them down. Do this for 5 rounds and you win yourself a fight. Unfortunately, this fight, the high output of Khamzat early proved fruitful. The takedown in the first round was executed masterfully and patiently by Khamzat. Once he locked in the body triangle, the round was pretty much over. In the second round, instead of coming out and trying to dominate on the feet, Usman took a much slower approach, probably in fear of the same thing happening again. This led him to not be in much favor for points when he was finally taken down again, more than likely losing him the round. Although it was a smart approach to the second round, it didn't leave much wiggle room for him on the scorecards. Trying to space out and point box a much longer reach was probably not a great idea, especially when all that was needed to happen to completely negate that was a takedown and some control time on the ground from Khamzat. This is where the third round was interesting. It's very clear that the output of Khamzat was nowhere near what it was when the fight started, and Usman seemed more than capable of continuing for as many rounds as needed. Fortunately for Khamzat though, the fight was already won for him. He just had to survive. I think that were this fight to continue for a full 2 more rounds, Usman would have won. Sadly it didn't, and Usman's style of stalling and tiring out his opponents till victory couldn't completely blossom in what little time they were allotted. Usman had to capitalize on the moments he had instead of planning ahead. A mindset that many contenders can learn from, some could even call it a champion's mindset, only lost him the fight. I'd also like to quickly add, I don't understand why this was supposedly a fight for a title shot. A man far behind everyone else in rankings, and another who has never even fought in the division and lost his last 2 fights. It just doesn't make sense to me. The main event was special. It wasn't what people expected, but I think it perfectly mirrors some of the things highlighted in the co-main event. Originally supposed to be the rematch and redemption for Charles Oliveira, turned into being a spotlight for his foe, Islam Makhachev. Firstly, it seemed Volk came into this with the wrong mentality. He said,
let's go out and finish this guy. No pressure on me, baby. No pressure at all. All the pressure's on him. I'm coming off the couch. You better do something about it.
I have nothing to lose. Instead of coming in with that true champion's mindset of planning ahead and seeing everything to gain, he almost allowed himself failure before the fight had even begun. In the opposite, Islam used every opportunity he had to capitalize on a near flawless victory. I've seen many people try to explain away how impressive what Islam did was. I'm not for it. At the end of the day, I don't, or maybe didn't, have much of an opinion on Islam. But to say what he did wasn't masterful and a showcase of growth as a fighter is a huge disgrace and is not deserved. Sure, a short notice fight isn't as bad when you've had the full training camp. But these were two very different fighters. The first fight between Volk and Islam was extremely close, and comparing that to the fight with Charles Oliveira, to say this fight with Volk was a much harder day at work is an understatement. I think Volk could probably continue to keep his belt fighting only 10-day camps. The small jump in weight seems meaningless for such a great fighter. This wasn't an easy task, and in no way, shape, or form did Islam not step up to the occasion, and I'm not so sure I could say the same about Volk. He didn't need all 5 rounds to battle his way out on top. He didn't plan to use all 5 rounds grappling and negating what damage Volk could induce. He capitalized on every opportunity placed in front of him, and threw that head kick without conviction.